In reality, only a select few individuals hold the power of influence. Not a pounce over a luxury item never to be owned, but real influence over police, governments, and even clandestine fraternities. My true story is so controversial that I invite you to comment and even question my integrity. Episode 4, Top Flight. The trial began in January 1999 at Chelmsford Crown Court in Essex before Justice Blofeld. Blofeld being the same surname as attributed to the arch-enemy of James Bond in Ian Fleming's books and films. Paul Harris said that the trial was to be in accordance with a Freemasons trial, something that none of us had heard of before, nor since, and it's believed to be a trial where there is no challenge to the evidence. I have since asked Paul Harris to explain this, and he's refused to do so. I missed most of the trial, other than to give my evidence, as I had to work at the galley. The defence team told my parents not to sit in the trial, which was odd because it gave the impressions that my brothers had no family support. During the trial, Bert recalls asking his barrister to ask a particular question of a witness. There were issues with this question, in that his barrister, Carter Stevenson, wouldn't ask the question. What came from it stunned all of us. The prosecution revealed that there was a relationship between a juror and a barrister that shared a room with the prosecutor. Now, I had to rerun this a few times when I first heard it. So what they were saying is that a juror at my brother's murder trial was related to a barrister that shared a room with the junior barrister of the prosecution. Now, anyone would think that there's something not right by that. A lot of people might say, well, barristers sit together, they're straight up people, they're not going to make anything of this. But there is a law regards to bias and the potential for bias, and everyone in this trial knew it. So there were questions asked of the relationship, and the barrister was called, not at the trial, but by the prosecution, to answer a few three questions. One of which was, what's the relationship? Is it still active? And he said, no, it's a ex-brother-in-law. He said, I don't see them anymore, even though his mother has been informed about things that have been going on in this case. Now, that in itself should have raised concerns. But the judge was having none of it, and the juror was allowed to stay on the jury for this trial. Now, the other thing that was strange was that Wicks was withdrawn at the direction of the judge, and no one knows to this day why. The judge directed that Wicks was to be removed from the trial. Another thing that was strange, that George Carter Stevenson said he had a statement that implicated Wicks to the murder, but the court wouldn't allow him to use it. Whatever reason you might give in favour of the judge making these decisions, there's certainly something not right here. The trial went for, and my mum and I waited nervously at the galley for the verdict. I can still see her now sitting at the bar, drinking vodka, unmeasurable vodka. And she would just sit there, she was made up, as if she was expecting the sons to return and everyone get back to normal after a great party at the galley. The phone rang, knew it was the decision. So I went over to hear the outcome, and with my heart beating as fast as it could, I watched my mum looking at me, her oldest son, wanting me to reassure her that everything will be okay. As I lifted the handset, I could hear the echoes of cheers and tears in equal measures. My dad having to deliver the sad news that my two brothers had been convicted of murder and manslaughter by diminished responsibility for Paul. They'd both been taken down to the cells for conversation with their respective barristers, and the police made no effort in hiding their feelings of success. In fact, David Bright cheered out loud right in my grandmother's face, a 76-year-old disabled pensioner. Whoever says it's not personal, mistaken. And this was not the first time we'd hear of the police's personal vendetta in promotion of this case and hiding the injustice behind it. As soon as the words were given to me, my mum fell from her stool, legs bent underneath her as she entered the prone position on the floor, crying uncontrollably, my sons, why my son? There was nothing I could do to console her. Neither did she want me to, as she was very vulnerable and devastated with the news. I got on my knees and held her as she cried, and neither of us knowing of the world we'd just entered, nor the intent of the British government and their informants to manage this case and ensure that any appeal nor any leniency would be allowed to our family. In fact, the punishment intentionally inflicted on our family by those mentioned, immediately and above those instructed on behalf, was so extensive that it still exists, even more than ever to this day. I didn't know much about Craig Wicks. I never met him, and he had not really crossed my radar. With that, we were advised that an appeal would be sought, and with the police still dragging their feet, I wondered if I could dig around, even though I didn't know where to start. Craig allegedly was witnessed to have been involved in at least one crime prior to the murder, yet his record seemed squeaky clean. He'd been fingered for breaking the law several times, it seems, but each time he'd walked. The rumour was that he and his immediate family were police informants, but rumours are rumours. This was, however, only a rumour that I couldn't let go. My mother felt useless during this time, and to try and take her mind off things, we asked her to trace Craig Wick's family and understand their local connections to see who might be associated to and potentially pull the strings along with Essex Police. During the period leading up to the trial, some of the key witnesses had been threatened. John McGrath was one of those intimidating witnesses, along with another man the police referred to as John Bond. John Bond was recorded in the unused material as intimidating witness as well. The police said that they couldn't find anyone named John Bond anywhere, as there were so many, but also made specific reference in the police documents to there being a potential for John Bond to be related to the Wicks family. It was in fact John Bonner, not Bond, who was at this time the husband of Penny Wicks, Craig Wick's sister, married in 1987. John Bonner's profession on the marriage certificate is ice cream vendor. Penny Wicks is the older sister of Craig. We had a lead. Mum looked into the parents of John Bonner and found that it was his father, also John Bonner, who married a Florence Maria Blundell. Hang on a minute, I thought, I know the name Blundell. Surely there can't be a relationship there. It transpired from government documents, open documents that are held on Ancestry.com, that Florence Maria Blundell is the eldest daughter of Edwin Blundell and Pastora Blundell, nee Larius. Further shipping documents revealed that Pastora and Florence Blundell fled Gibraltar in 1937 on a ship bound for England. The Blundell family settled at 131 Cromwell Road, SW7, before the two sons were born. The first son is Edward Charles Blundell, otherwise known as Eddie Blundell, and the younger son, William Raymond Blundell, is known as Billy Blundell. It seemed that the Blundells, the same Blundells that I knew and grew up with, were related to Wicks and Bonner. And whilst this made no sense, I was concerned, no more than when shown the birth certificates, as Billy and Eddie Blundell's father was recorded as a police constable. We got two people, Billy and Eddie Blundell, who are claiming to be gangsters, whose father is a police constable. I bet they fucking don't tell anyone that. Now, I knew that Blundell's had various business interests, ice creams named Piccadilly Whip, and there was a London weekend television production and documentary by the London programme called Ice Cream for ITV on the Blundells, where Billy named himself King Cone. John Bonner worked for his uncles, Billy and Eddie Blundell, and is currently the director of Piccadilly Whip Catering Limited, whose registered office at 75 Springfield Road, Chelmsford. Now, I used to hang out with Billy and Richard Blundell as a boy, when we'd play run-outs and centred at a small concrete playground located immediately outside of my then home. I spent time with Richard and his cousin Paul Bullen at Blundell's family home in Mayfair Close, South Ockenden. The same street ran parallel to mine, and only 3 minutes walk away. Billy Blundell's wife Barbara Blundell would cook and generally look after me while I was there. As we looked further, we found Paul Bullen is the group director and founder of the UK's largest privately owned security company, OpenView Security Solutions Limited, and Cartel Security Systems Limited, and 9 additional active companies. We just couldn't find any evidence to support the Blundells being EastEnders, even though they claim to be. Their birth certificates are evidence of that. Now, hang on a minute. It's no secret that both Billy and Eddie Blundell are self-professed Essex gangsters. If you look in 2024, they claim, or someone claims, that they're the Krays of Essex. I don't know about that. And that's definitely not how I remember them. And it must be something they've adopted on the social media increase after the Essex Boys case. You know, the case that everyone bumps themselves up and lives off 3 dead people in a Range Rover. Now, what I do know is that they rarely mention that their father was a police constable in Essex. although there is mention of Billy Blundell having bacon sandwiches waiting for Essex Police when he was made aware of a visit from the police, according to an ex-police detective on the internet. Now, I'd always thought of the Blundels as good people, although I also heard rumours and allegations of the Blundels being grasses over a cab rank shooting in East London. The Blundels also boast about having got away with 9 criminal prosecutions. So, but how does anyone do that unless they are informants or very lucky or connected? I just couldn't work it out. My insights into the allegations against the Blundels was realised when I was introduced to an old friend and West Ham supporter who had invited me to meet with a friend of his at the Avenue pub in Manor Park before a home game at Upton Park. We would also meet on game day at the wine bar on the Barking Road at East Ham and other East End pubs and bars before making our way to each match. Whilst I was born in East London, with generations of family residents, we were all Hammers supporters. It will be of little surprise that I attended a few football matches in the late 80s and 90s. My memories are varied, although one of which directly relates to the Blundels, as at a previous meeting in the square in Manor Park after a West Ham match. The meeting took place back in the Avenue. We knew it as the Ave. I went to Robin's Pie and Mash in East Ham High Street, which was owned by a family friend, Teddy Robin, a Canning Town face, and a friend of my father. I'm eating the pie after lunch, went to see my mate's friend in Upton Park, and included in that introduction was a reference to me coming from South Ockenden. Now the bloke took a step back. He started looking up and down the street and reached for something behind his wristband, looking around anxiously. South Ockenden, eh? He began angrily. You know those fucking grasses, the Blundels, do you? I knew you must mean one of the Blundels, so I replied, yeah, I do, yeah, I know, which only made him more alert and his eyes widened. He then looked at my mate, Gary, as if he was in disgust at introducing him to anyone knowing a Blundell. So I thought to give it to him because I knew the Blundels. I grew up with him in the same way I defended Richard Blundell in my youth when friends of ours at school were putting it on him. My contact gave me the same look. The bloke then said, so how'd you know the Blundels then? So I went, well, I grew up with them. I went to school with one of their kids. I went to their home and knocked about with them. I know them well. So do you have it with them now? And it was just about to go off. And it was years ago. I stopped knocking about with them when I was about 13, during school. My mates changed and I found football friends instead and later a keen interest in girls. He looked relieved and continued to explain the full story of his family feud with the Blundels that began in East Ham taxi rank. He alleged that the Blundels were grasses, giving evidence in naming those in a few that his friends and his family. He went on to tell me that such was the disgust with the Blundels in the East End that someone bought a greyhound, naming it and racing it as Blundell the Grass. They used to run it at Walthamstow Dog Track. He laughed out loud when telling me, do you know what? The fucking best bit was the dog kept on fucking winning, so it was all in the local fucking papers, Blundell the Grass. He went on to tell me of the Blundels' numerous prosecution blunders, and so many that they couldn't have got away with them all. Other than, as he believed, unless the Blundels were police grasses, although he had no evidence to prove it either way. Now, I'd heard of this before, but thought to ignore it as a rumour, as my experience with the Blundels was different. I went home that night and mentioned the story to my old man. His only comment was, they're doing their thing, and no one of any credibility in Canning Town has it with them. It all stems from their behaviour at the Ilford cab rank, and he left it there. The outcome into our review into Wicks was that he was related to the Blundels via Bonner, and that the Blundels had allegedly got with multiple prosecutions were openly bragging about it. The other thing that didn't add up for me, or for many years, was the Blundels had a pitch directly outside the Tower of London and Tower Hill Station. These were two prime locations. There was enough of a smell to be concerned about the evidence of them as being grasses, but then there was no testimonies of any credible evidence against them. As far as we knew, the Blundels were ice cream people that got away with a load of prosecutions and created a lot of enemies. This time though, Bonner and or Blundell surely couldn't have assisted Wicks, could they? Do they have that kind of clout with Essex Police? Are they informants? It's funny, you wonder these things and you think you're never going to get to the bottom of it. But then again, if you put a family through turmoil and have two brothers serve or get convicted of a life sentence, then you surely got to look over your shoulder, haven't you? And it might be one day, and it might be 2 days, it might be 10 years. One day that's coming back, isn't it? There were others questioned with the murder, both of which were drinking with Wicks that night. Paul McCleary, John McGrath, both living in South Ockenden, and both know Wicks for some time. 5 individuals ran from the scene and were being tracked by the police helicopter. We later ran some genealogy checks on 2 of them. There was not much on McCleary, but John Martin McGrath of Foxglove Road, South Ockenden. He married Susan Blundell, a relation of the Blundels. So here's another person who's involved in the case, connected by marriage to the Blundels. McGrath, who worked with Bonner, was also in this case and accused of intimidating witnesses. My mum was on a roll, so she investigated the point on the juror being related to the prosecution barrister. The prosecution junior was Mr. Rupert Overbury. The juror was said to be the ex-brother-in-law of Mr. David Reginald Holborn, both of them at 18 Red Lion Court Chambers in Essex. My mother's journey from stay-at-home housewife to recognised maritime researcher and genealogist had paid off, although her initiative skills were quite unbelievable. She found that during the trial, a juror was disposed of, removed from the trial, after declaring that his brother lived within a mile of the offence. Now, there's the threshold. The prosecution revealed midway through the trial that there was a juror, another juror, related to the barrister who shared a room with prosecution junior. A juror related to Mr. Holborn who shared a room with Mr. Overbury. An issue of bias was of concern to me brother, and he asked his barrister, Carter Stevenson, to make an application to the court. We have no idea whether that application was made, because when we asked Carter Stevenson about his memory on this very important matter, a very rare matter, isn't it, of a juror being on a related to a barrister at the trial, he can't remember it. Leading barrister, whose memory should serve him in law, citing law and criminal cases, can't remember for the life of him anything about this juror because we put it to him. Even stranger than that, if it could be, his junior, Arlette Piercy, also can't remember. And neither can Paul Harris, the solicitor. Now, is that convenient, or was there a wave of something in the air that removed everyone's memory in that moment? Justice Blofeld asked these questions and it was all refused. But it wasn't only the fact that David Holborn was a barrister that shared a room with the prosecution junior. My mum then found out that before being a barrister, he was a copper, a detective, inspector at Essex. And he knew David Bright, the commander of Essex and officer in charge of this case. So let's rewind. An ex-Essex police inspector who knew the officer in charge in this case, worked with him, became a barrister whose brother-in-law was on the jury. Now, if there was any need to join any more dots, I'll say this, that a complaint was made against Mr. Holborn about this matter, the juror, because he didn't tell the whole truth in telling the judge, or telling the prosecution, that his relationship with the juror was an ex-brother-in-law, because my mum further found out that he hadn't mentioned his second wife, who he was married to at the time. It was that wife who had the current brother-in-law on the jury, not the ex-brother-in-law. Further to that complaint, and without knowledge of why, Mr. Holborn moved chambers from 18 Red Lion Court and set up his own chambers, called the Chambers of David Holborn, at 75 Springfield Road, Chelmsford, Essex. Is it going to be any surprise to you to hear that that's next door to John Bonner at Piccadilly Whip Catering? It doesn't matter how much you dress it up. The police, Blundell's, Bonner, Bright, there was something in it, and we didn't know how long it was going to take us to unravel, if we could unravel it at all. What we did know is we were determined to do something. It was difficult at the galley. My mum looked at me and said that she couldn't be around me because I reminded her of her sons. And my father got the same kind of treatment, and we understand that. And I was looking at a way to somehow exit that place, albeit absolutely frightened out of my life what was going to happen to my mum, drinking and having the pub earning money, and lots of wrong uns going to wrap themselves around her, knowing she's there on her own. How bad is it going to get? The roller coaster, 1 minute you're up, the next you're rolling, and the next you're back again. I was called by one of the strippers, Coco, Suzanne was a real name, who I spent a bit of time with, let's say, and she asked if I'd like to go for pie mash, which I thought was quite nice. So anyway, we went out and I went on to Ilford because she wanted something out of one of the shops there. So we went into Robin's pie mash shop in Ilford. And as we got on the train at Manor Park, I looked down and I could see a Newham recorder, and on the front of it was Lifesavers. And I saw a picture of myself. It was the Newham Gazette. Picked one up and started reading it. A heroic pub manager from North Woolwich rescued 3 children wrapped up to their chests in mud in the River Thames. Darren, who works in the California pub on Albert Road, North Woolwich, waded into the quagmire and dragged out 3 brothers, aged 10, 11 and 13. He was working one afternoon when a man ran into the pub and raised the alarm. Darren, 29, said, "At first we thought it was a house on fire and ran out with some locals, but the group were led to the river. I overheard that some children were trapped in the mud. I ran down the slipway and saw that they were up to their chests. They'd been in there for about half an hour. Luckily, Darren used to work as a shipbuilder and knows how to walk through the mud. I didn't realise how deep it was, I thought. It would be about a foot, but it was more like 4 feet, he said. Darren went out as far as he could. It was then that I realised that I'd have trouble getting myself out, let alone anyone else. I lifted one out of the mud and told him to relax. He was screaming. Darren rescued the 2 other before the children were taken to the pub. They were stripped of their underclothes, wrapped in blankets, and sat in front of the fire where they were given crisps and drinks, exhausted. The boys' parents who come from Charlton were called and they collected the children. Afterwards, I was completely exhausted. The water was coming in another 30 minutes and it would have been over them. White Watch Commander at Silvertown Fire Station, Michael Burrell, said, "It was quite a feat. We had been sent to the wrong address and by the time we got to the scene, the children were out. It appears that one of the children had fallen in and the other 2 had gone in after him. Darren may now be in for a bravery award." As I finished reading this on the train, I wondered whether our 3 brothers would be saved, and as I was called on to assist in saving these 3 brothers. I sometimes wondered what happened to these brothers, and whether their influence on the world meant that they were required to be saved that day, as so many others die. I bought a few copies for my family and phoned my mum, who didn't answer the phone, then my nan, and then my dad. There was no mention of receiving a bravery award, but I didn't need one, nor would I be given one, as any positive promotion of our family wouldn't look good for the police management of an injustice, which they were working hard to cover up. Coco and I walked through Ilford. I bought her some surfing clothing, which she loved, and something for my brothers as well. We went on to Robin's pie and mash shop and took a seat whilst I went to the counter. "Is Teddy about?" I said. The female behind the counter didn't even batter an eyelid, similar to those barmaids I had in the Cali, brought up on deflecting interest from their loved ones and managing the situation through ancestral instincts. "Do you want anything to eat, love?" she said. "I do, but I'd like to speak to Teddy first." And this was a genuine answer that she'd not expected, and I saw a defence mechanism as she clammed up a little. Now I thought to release her a bit and said, "Look, can you please do me a favour and look out the back, and if Teddy's there, can you say to him, 'Are you from Dixie?' He'll know what that means," and one of the few people that would use the phrase. "By the way, I'd like a double pie and mash, and she'd like a mash on its own as she's a vegetarian." The woman gave me the strangest look, and I couldn't tell if it was my reference to the old song, Dixie, or my request for only mash in a pie and mash shop. Anyway, nevertheless, within about 30 seconds, Teddy appeared. "Hello, son," he said. He looked at the female and continued, and then he took a plate of mash for him and said, "I'll do the pies for this one." He went out the back, put the pies on, and then come and sat down on our table. He turned around to Coco, he said, "Hello, darling." Then he turned to me and said, "Sorry about the boys. Fucking Liberty. And everyone knows that those 2 cunts had an hand in it. You must be aware the people were queuing up to deal with those fucking grasses. Ilford and Manor Park, don't forget the past. Anyway, how's your mum getting on? Is she alright?" I looked towards Coco, didn't know what to say, as her culinary delights were facing her, covered in what she called green sauce. "She's not good," I said. "She's drinking heavy and she's not in a good place. She won't see me, and my dad's doing his best, but with the visits it's becoming harder by the day. Look, just keep your eye on her, son. She'll be suffering more than the rest of you. They're her sons. She gave birth to them, and she suffered pain like you won't believe. She's ingrained to give a lifetime of protection for you boys. It's her natural instinct. She'll be in a dark place, and it'll be very hard to reach her during this time." As Ted's words flowed, I held back the tears and the reality of what she was going through. It hit hard. "All right, I'm going to leave you to your dinner and make some more pies." He got up and left. As I finished my meal and watched as Coco dipped the tip of her fork into the mash and took a smile as she ate it. All of it, albeit with the customary vinegar and black pepper, just as I had. I just left to California, hoped for the best, asked my dad to look after my mum and tried to focus on earning money. I took a job with a company in southwest London who had a project of an old pub refurb, turning it in from a commercial building to a residential hotspot for a commercial artist. I worked with a guy there. I was running the job, basically. I was site manager, and one of the guys who worked there was Errol. He was a nice enough bloke, black guy, slim build, loved to gamble, kept himself, and he'd been with the firm for years. He'd ask me every day if he could have an hour off to go down to the booking office. I said, "Yeah, go on, just put it back in when you get back. Just do a bit of work when you get back." And that was working well, although he tried to leave a bit earlier and a bit earlier each day. This I tolerated because I asked him to look after the place when I had to leave early to go and see Paul, which was in Wickford, quite a way, quite a bit of traffic. What I didn't expect was to receive a phone call from the manager telling me I was fired because I left early. The only person on site could have known that was Errol. Isn't it funny, you know what I mean? You trust people and you look after them and you give them a little bit and they grass you. Terrible. Anyway, I was back out of work and sitting at my dad's place, back in my flat. There I'm living the memories of Jimmy and my family and fucking everyone, and trying to drive from there to any job I could find. Dad popped over one day, gave me a torn bit of paper, handed to him by my nan, project manager at Top Flight Loft Conversions. Well, Top Flight were a loft conversion company and based in Haven Green Lane in Ealing, London. I called them and arranged an interview with Peter Lloyd, the managing director of the company. My mum had left the Cali and her relationship with my dad deteriorated. Whilst all angry at another stake in the heart, my father did the honourable thing and continued to support her throughout, till death do us part, being another element to his heroic persona. Neither of them wanted or could live together under the same roof, so my mother was placed in a hostel. She was unfortunately bullied and mistreated until receiving a one-bedroom flat in Grays, only 4 miles from her family home, where my dad remained to support her throughout. Imagine, you're living your life, your brothers are convicted under very shady circumstances, people are walking away from the trial under equal circumstances, and your mum drinking to excess, going into a home, being bullied. How much can you take? It was no surprise my mum and I became estranged, and I thought her behaviour was not very helpful to my dad, not least because he was also suffering and he was still supporting her, and me and everyone. My dad told me that Thurrock Council had bolted perforated steel security screens all over my mum's windows on the ground floor flat. She was unable to open her windows during the summer heat and found it claustrophobic. How convenient, I thought, of Thurrock Council, and there must be some influence coming from Essex Police. I was then beside myself when my dad called me up and told me that there had been a fire at my mum's block of flats and there'd been a body found in the blaze. I thought the worst, I couldn't believe it. Listen in to each episode as I engage you in my personal journey of how a boy growing up on a council estate in Essex would eventually own the most exclusive online private members club in the world.